Welcome to The Digital Difference with Scott Gulliver and Oliver Moradi. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Digital Difference podcast with me, Scott Gulliver, and your co-host, Oliver Moradi. How are you doing, Ollie?
Yeah, not too bad, Scott. Had a bit of a COVID scare this week, but all good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, happy to carry on with this.
All okay, or?
Yeah, thankfully, all came out negative, but it's never good when you have a scare, is it?
No, not with the state that things are at the moment. I was glad to hear everything turned out all right.
Yeah. It's 50-50, I guess, isn't it? But thankfully, just this common cold.
That's good. Something you can deal with, hopefully.
Yeah. So Scott, what are we talking about today then?
So today I wanted to talk about the benefits of keeping businesses up to date with new technologies or new digital technologies specifically. We'll get into some of the points in a bit more detail shortly, but broadly wanted to talk about this topic because I think today we still see a lot of companies, they might know some of the more obvious benefits of technology, but they, for whatever reason, don't decide to actually pull the trigger. It's almost a checkbox exercise sometimes, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, technology is being used more and more, obviously, all the time. I mean, everything we do. So the more companies can realize some of the benefits for them, hopefully that'll unlock some of the decision-making to really get ahead of the curve with some of the tech that's that can really be a benefit to them.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
Of course, as much as we use it in our day-to-day lives as well, it's becoming a bit of a central pillar in businesses. Again, not having that checkbox exercise of just having the IT department looking after technology for the company, but actually having that central core of tech running through pretty much any company these days is pretty important, I think.
Yep.
So yeah, I think ultimately companies, from what I can see, are still pretty slow to adopt technology for a variety of reasons. So hopefully we'll discuss some of the reasons that they should be thinking otherwise today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick point on that as well. I think we find often that it's actually these bigger businesses that are slow to adopt because they're so used to working in a certain way, aren't they? That they don't often adopt this new technology. They don't keep updating their systems because they pay so much just to incorporate one system. 2 years later, it's out of date. So I think we see that quite often, really, in bigger businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think that risk is a big part, or certainly the cost of change at least is a big part of why they don't change. And hopefully realizing some of the benefits that might not be so obvious at first glance can help to outweigh that either risk or cost or whatever's been slowing them down to date.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. So your first point here, Scott, is incremental changes are much easier to implement. So do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, going back to that big business company that you've been talking about, or that you talked about just now, I think half the reason that they often won't change or find it hard to change is because they are so behind the curve that by the time it comes to upgrade, for example, it's a massive program to actually implement that change. And this is a difficult one because it means that you need to get to a point where you're actually kind of on the stable edge of technology in the first place. But once you're there, I think implementing changes pretty quickly as they come along is super important to make sure that you don't come across that same situation again. And of course, the smaller the changes are, and if you're keeping rolling, the change will be more technically simple to implement anyway, which will lead to less disruption or less cost to actually implement the change. But actually also, if we're talking about technology that people are using, for example, internal people in the company, those small incremental changes will often be easier for those people to adopt rather than these huge changes to the way they work day to day.
Yeah, completely agree with that, Scott. And there's a bit where you see this in larger businesses, and going back to what you said about projects earlier, I mean, there's a massive project that'll implement these changes, these technological changes, bring in this new system that everybody loves. It's new on the market, and you'll find that by the time that change is being put into place and those new technologies are being implemented into the business, a new technology has come and it's completely taken over and it's made that old system redundant. They start the whole process again. Yep. You'll find that companies just often don't like to do that at all because they're just constantly trying to keep up. But the bigger the company, the harder their change to implement.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like technical debt in our industry. The longer it stays around, the more it will snowball, and it gets to the point where it's just too big to deal with. It's much easier to deal with those small improvements as they come.
Yeah, definitely.
The one caveat to this, of course, is I think it's important to avoid changing things too often. I think small improvements and small incremental updates, for example, to any tech you're using on site or to the way that people work based on how they're interacting with tech is generally a good thing. And I think that should be almost at the leading edge of where technology can take them. The thing that you want to avoid as a company, and again, this is a big reason I think why companies don't like to be too advanced in their technology stack, is that they don't want to implement a change 1 month and then next month have to get everyone to change the way they're working again. Of course, that leads to massive fatigue, skepticism in the internal workforce as well. It's not a good thing for morale generally, but I think having some people that are dedicated to look at the changes that you're implementing, hopefully making the right decisions, but of course you're going to get that wrong sometimes, but as long as that's not too often, and as long as you're looking not necessarily at changing things all the time, but more keeping up to date in terms of just rolling out general small updates, then I think that's generally a good thing.
Okay, Scott. So do you think that people's mindset comes into factor when businesses are considering a change with new technologies, for instance?
Yeah, I think so. I think in our industry, in the tech industry, we often don't see the truth in companies here. And the fact is, I think that a lot of employees in the company aren't necessarily that excited about new technology and making use of the latest and greatest all the time. They just want to do their job and have as fewer barriers as possible. And I think morale is hugely affected when you're perhaps seen as unnecessarily changing things or changing things to the detriment of what you're doing, or as we've said, changing it 1 minute and then back the next or to a different thing. So I think it's pretty crucial for anyone implementing change to make sure that they're doing it well and with their employees or whoever else is going to be using the software in mind. But yeah, I think morale needs to be a huge thing that they're taking into consideration with any change.
Brilliant. So that kind of brings us on to your second point there, Scott, which is keeping an edge over the competition. So how do you think new technology is coming to that?
Yeah, so here it's all about opportunity. There's a world of opportunity within, as we know, within technology to bring new revenue streams, for example, into a company. Implementing technology, your technology stack, whether that be internal or external, will generally start to change thinking, hopefully, towards keeping up with the competition. Another thing here as well is just at a more basic level. If your competitors are generally changing their technology or keeping up to date with the latest technology and you are 5 years behind, for example, that's not a great place to be generally. There are little things as well, like the ability to change quickly. So generally people who are the companies that are on the newer software stacks or technology stacks will generally find it easier to be a bit more agile and a bit more adaptive to change. And that's obviously crucial in today's environment as things are just so unpredictable, which in and of itself is a great way for keeping up with the competition. But also actually, again, with a team hopefully focused on some of this change, you can preempt a lot of this. So figuring out the opportunities for the technology itself and how we implement it, it might be on internal practices or external. Having people that are looking at where the industry is moving or where their specific industry is moving, where their customers are going to be, where their competition is going to be, preempting some of that and getting some technology in place to build around it is generally a really good thing and can open up some proper innovation for these companies.
So do you think that companies may sacrifice having a good and successful way of working to keep them within competition with with other businesses, for instance, by implementing new technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think they pretty much go hand in hand, to be honest. I think you're right. The companies won't necessarily think too much about the ways of working and see a new technology or a new opportunity and just shoot for it. But of course, ways of working go hand in hand with making that a success.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about the opportunities here, I think that at the most basic level, just finding new ways to talk to your customers is going to be pretty key, or it's going to be important here. Generally, technology tends to open up communication that's faster, easier, better for your customers and talks to them where they are as well. And all of that is going to foster a better relationship between you and your customers and hopefully in and of itself be a better relationship and a better basis for your business.
Absolutely.
So yeah, generally, I think opportunities come with technology and keeping up with technology, especially when that technology crosses the customer boundary. I think that there's a bunch of opportunity that people can use to keep up with the competition, and in a lot of cases, preempt changes in the industry and actually leap ahead of competition.
Brilliant. And your third point, which is I find very interesting here, you put down as data protection. So where do you think new technology is coming to that?
Yeah, so this is quite a specific one. However, this is one of the areas actually I think that is a bit of a hidden benefit for keeping up with new technology, but one that's pretty understood by businesses and can be implemented by quite a large team if it needs to be. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword with technology. I think you definitely need to understand any change you're putting in place to make sure that it's not going to make any protection of data that you have worse. There's certainly the ability to do that if you're not careful and suddenly put your data on servers that you don't have access to, or services that may be a little risky. So you definitely need to understand the changes. But generally, as we know, without technology, a mess of files and data is pretty much the norm, and that's what tends to take hold. And we have files everywhere in different folder structures on everyone's PCs, scattered everywhere. Generally not a good thing. So technology tends to bring about a lot of opportunity to bring some sense to that data and to protect it. And the other thing, of course, in today's age as well, is technology helps to foster that online first approach. So again, if you're in a company that's not taking technology seriously, from what we've seen, you tend to have a quite archaic system that favors almost offline first, where you're taking potentially crucial information or protected information around into public environments on laptops that may be left in places they shouldn't be and can be accessed pretty easily. So technology is a great way to help combat some of this, and it's another good benefit just to factor in when you're deciding whether to spend time and money on the technology upgrade.
Cool. So do you think there's a larger frequency of new technologies being used since the GDPR rules got changed and updated and everything like that?
I think so, yeah. I think there's a lot more solutions nowadays that people can use to help solve some of those problems. I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies are still behind GDPR these days. Again, it's probably the time now for companies to look at some technology to help update. I think actually a lot of the reasons that they aren't up to date at the moment is because of this big upgrade they're now having to go through to get their systems in a decent place to be GDPR compliant. But yeah, for sure. The one great thing about GDPR is it's, of course, making companies think about their data now and actually think about solving the privacy and the protection angle of it, which is great. And the other good thing about GDPR is it's starting to involve a lot more of the compliance teams in any technology discussions. And in terms of keeping data protection at the forefront of being a benefit with this stuff, it's really important to bring those guys along for the ride. So involve compliance team early and often in that process, get them working day to day with the technology team, and make sure that any changes we go through aren't just it's not just a checkbox exercise in terms of is compliance happy. We should be designing these things with the goal of privacy protection and data protection in mind.
Absolutely.
The other great thing about data protection, or at least technologies that go some way to implement data protection, is that organization of that data often comes hand in hand. The great benefits of this are generally that files are easier to find. You're not left with that situation where an employee might leave the company and then all of the files are suddenly lost, or people have really struggle to access them. So generally, any technology solution that's being implemented to solve the data protection angle generally will also solve the organization problem as well, which brings a lot of benefits in and of itself.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot with cloud-based backup files implemented into most systems now, don't we? So we don't see any of that information being lost or anything like that. And all that's protected and backed up.
Yeah, and then of course you layer that over with things like search, and it just becomes much easier for people to work with. Absolutely.
Brilliant. So that brings us on to our next point, which is improved internal processes, Scott.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the more obvious benefits often with technology. So companies will tend to upgrade their technology generally to help the internal teams. But this is a big one, of course, as well. And it's not just in the small time savings or the efficiency savings, but also it's about helping people work better. And again, it comes back to that morale point as well. People who aren't having to go through redundant software that makes their life a lot more difficult will generally be happy with what they're doing. Yeah, one caveat again with this benefit is it's important to make sure that you're not just rolling out software that isn't necessarily mature enough. Often that can be a detriment to people working with it rather than a benefit, especially if they're having to learn something completely brand new that breaks the mold of general day-to-day working, or if it's something that's likely to go by the wayside eventually. There are a lot of products that especially bleeding edge companies will work with, but you'll find that technology a year down the line just suddenly gets sunlighted and it's just gone away, which isn't great. So it's important to make sure that the software is mature enough in that case.
So how do you think a company can go about to ensure that they know what they're buying or what they are purchasing is mature enough software?
Yeah, it's a good question. For one, I think having a team that understands this stuff well enough is important. In the ideal world, you'd have the whole company looking at the technology, or at least giving influence to what they need out of technology. But I think having a team that understands technology and what they're bringing in is pretty cool. Also, speaking not just to sales teams, but other companies in your industry as well, seeing what they're using, getting real world understanding of how of what works well and what doesn't, and often bringing in experts if it's a big piece and you're really looking to upgrade your technology stack. Actually, getting some external consultants in to provide a good audit of what you're doing and what might work well, especially for those smaller companies who don't have that internal technology team. This can be a really good thing. And so more often than not, the cost of updating or implementing better digital technology can be offset by savings from any internal improvements. So as long as the technology is just not being brought in for any good reason, but actually being brought in to help the workforce, then generally people will be saving hopefully a lot of time and therefore money with what they're doing. And that comes from things like improved communication, again, reducing redundancy in what they're doing, helping reduce errors, and hoping to automate some of that as well.
So Scott, do you still see employees getting worried and concerned about new tech coming in and maybe seeing their jobs being automated away?
Yeah, I think they still do, to be honest, especially in companies that are a little bit behind in this stuff. The more that companies see the aid of technology, I think the less they are worried about their job being automated away. But they do need to be shown that. I think there's still this general worry that robots are going to be doing all the jobs in the future, which certainly will be the case in some industries, but certainly in the short term, I think we can still go a long way to just helping people with their jobs, taking away the stuff that they really should not have to spend time on, and let them get on with the stuff that they are really good at and really can apply some thinking to. So yeah, they definitely are still thinking that in some instances, but it's about small incremental change, implementing things in the right way to bring or to help show that your workforce that this is a good change for them and for the company.
Absolutely, Scott. And just to elaborate on that as well, I think that also when you look at this, when you see new tech coming in, and people obviously do worry that, is this tech going to take my job? Often that new tech also provides jobs. So wherever one job's taken away in one sector from a piece of tech, there's always a new job that's then created to maybe run that tech. So I mean, there's always going to be jobs created from new tech coming in. So that I think that people worry often that sooner or later the whole world's going to be run by one big computer and there's going to be no jobs available or anything like that. But it's never going to be that way, because new technologies will always provide new jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact of the matter is that when people do eventually move to jobs that are required because of technology coming in, they're going to need to be pretty technology literate and up to date with what works and what they can do. So having access to that technology in the company, although it's not a direct benefit for the company itself, can really help the employees to understand some of this technology, especially if they've from a background that they've just been in the same job working for so many years. As you say, eventually when those jobs, when they may be replaced, then they're going to need to be skilled up in a way that allows them to run some technology to facilitate those roles in other areas.
So that moves us nicely onto your next point, sorry, Scott, and that is fostering a good environment for employees. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this kind of leads on nicely from the last point, actually, where technology can be implemented to hopefully help the workforce. And we've covered this a bit already with morale and making sure that things are done right. This is a big thing this depends quite a lot on culture. So whether the teams welcome change or not will be a big factor in whether changing technology is going to be good or bad, or seen as good and bad. Ultimately, in the long run, as long as technology is implemented right, as we've discussed, I think that it will be a good thing for pretty much any team. But those initial stages might be pretty difficult sometimes. And the other thing to think about as well is that it's not just necessarily the environment for the current employee base, but also how attractive the company is to maybe potential employees or even potential customers. We're seeing these days that companies that are technology driven or just have a general good understanding of digital technology are pretty attractive for places to go and work, and also for services that people want to use as well as customers, especially in the prospective employee point. I mean, we're seeing more and more that companies or that candidates are asking about the technology environment within companies whilst they're joining. And often that's a big decision. People are less likely to join a company that has a very outdated technology stack, going back to old working environments that just don't support the ways of working that they've come to know and love.
Absolutely, Scott. So, and as you said before, we have to consider about how a change would affect the mental state of employees. So, do you think that companies have to kind of find that balance between having new technology that's going to be attractive to, like you said, customers and potential employees coming in, and also having that tech that also keeps the current employees' well-being in check and kind of keeps a positive workforce? So maybe even looking into that sort of new technology that's easy to use and easy to function, but kind of attractive.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it depends really on whether the culture of the existing employees are welcoming change or not, I think. But ultimately, giving teams good tools and technology can really help with job satisfaction. And even beyond that, I mean, getting specifically into things like a learning program supported by software, tools to help give people an opportunity to feedback on their working state or how their working day is going. All those types of things go a long way, and often they can be seen by some teams as a bit of overhead they don't necessarily want to do. But generally, they're really well received by a lot of teams and can really help with the company understanding how motivated their current workforce are, and hopefully that gives them opportunity then to change things based on that.
So do you think that potential employees, so thinking outside of how businesses should behave for employees, maybe thinking about how employees should behave for businesses, do you think employees should maybe try and make themselves a bit more tech savvy before approaching new companies? So do you think it's more of the company's responsibility to make that employee tech savvy?
Obviously it goes both ways, but I think that eventually, or pretty soon, and we're already seeing some of this, employees are going to need to know the technology before they can really fit well into a team anyway. So having a bit of that aptitude themselves to learn this stuff would be useful. And of course, we're seeing more and more that people are having technology. We're seeing technology as part of our daily lives anyway. So I think this won't be as big of a gap as it is in some cases now in the future, just because people will be so used to technology in their working lives or in their daily lives that it will just translate to their working lives. But of course, on the other foot, then there is, I think, a good reason for companies to want to upskill their employees, keep them happy, keep them around. And it's hopefully a transferable skill that will be good for them in the long run, wherever they go.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
One last thing surrounding the good environment for employees is that if it's done well, it can help to inspire a culture of constant improvement for the teams as well. We spoke a lot about this in the past, Ollie, about how using some of those learning frameworks or that agile framework to let people fail and try things and not feel worried, or foster an environment to facilitate that. And having technology and a technology change program in place, or at least part of your DNA almost to get that in place, can really help to foster some of that culture.
Brilliant. So that brings us on to our next point, which is dedicate a team to transformation/innovation. My favorite thing, innovation, Scott. So can we expand on innovation then?
Yeah, for sure. Now that we understand some of the benefits, it's about how to actually put this into practice. With all the will in the world, a company just won't have the time and day to put this into place without having a team almost dedicated, whether that's just for the period they're going through of change or hopefully for the long run as well. So quite often we're seeing these actually implemented not just as transformation teams as they've typically been, but almost badged as innovation teams, which I think is a really good spin on it. It's not just necessarily looking at the technology or the software that we need to put in place, but actually looking a bit wider than that. Hopefully they have a bigger picture in mind to see what the company needs. They're able to solve those problems, but also quickly identify suitable solutions to problems as well. And that might not be technology based. That might be a simple case of using some internal resource or external resource to fix a problem, or be a little bit innovative in that area. But often having a team like that looking after a technology stack can really be a good way of getting this constant improvement and being on the leading edge of technology into place.
Absolutely. I think that team also then has a responsibility to kind of battle the internal struggles that you would see in implementing that change. So, they might go out and see all that sort of innovative technology that they want to bring in, but then that's one battle to find that technology, and then it's another battle to actually implement it while within, say, a bigger company, whereas within a smaller company, that might be a bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really key for that team to be, firstly, prioritized well. So they should have clear-cut goals in terms of how they're helping and where they're helping. But also that team should make it a priority to go and embed themselves nicely within the company. Really establish a culture of helping the company out and helping those, especially those areas that might be a little bit more resistant to change or a little bit more fixed in their ways. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, and the other good benefit of having a team like this that's looking after innovation as a priority is that when situations do change in the future, they will hopefully have the ability and resource to adapt to that change because they will have done this in the past. So having a team that's dedicated to constantly looking at the bigger picture, as we've said, and looking for opportunities, applying solutions, trying them out and testing them within a good framework, they can just apply those exact same working principles to pretty much any situation that should come up, which will help the company adapt on a much larger scale.
Okay, brilliant, Scott. So that's our 6 main points that we really had for today then. So should we just go over each point quickly and just kind of revisit each thing that we talked about today?
Yeah, so I think broadly, all of these things have a cost to them, of course. And as we've discussed here, hopefully there are a lot of benefits that actually that cost can bring. It's just about looking a bit wider than you normally would at these types of changes. But generally, I think the main takeaways are that changing much more incrementally rather than batching things up over time is going to be much easier to implement in the long run. There are lots of benefits, whether it be from keeping an edge over the competition to protecting your data and making it easier for customers to work with that data and internal teams as well. So just general improved internal processes. There are lots of good benefits, and that's more on the specific implementation side. We've also got a lot more background benefits. Things like the good environment for employees is a real key one to hopefully help teams work more effectively in the long run and be more motivated and dedicated. And then the last one, of course, was to get this into place. It's really recommended to have a team looking at this in the long run and working on this day to day. And hopefully with all of this in place, we're not just seeing technology as just a necessary checkbox exercise anymore. It's much more of, again, that central pillar in the company. And we're really building our company around technology, which is really ultimately where I think most companies will need to end up sooner rather than later. There's a bunch of opportunities, both external and internal here. And hopefully we've explored some concrete ideas about how to actually implement them.
Well, thanks for that today, Scott. It's been really insightful. As always, thanks everybody so much for listening today. As always, we have a new website, thediginaldifference.show. The next episode should be out in 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to doing that one, and we hope that you come back to listen to us. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. We wanted to let you know a little about our digital agency. We design and build killer experiences and apps, and we also put out a bunch of free content to help companies of all shapes and sizes. Head to fluffdigital.com to find out more. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to keep a lookout for the next episode coming real soon.